No one would do what he did for an alien and her daughter, but he did. The Kansas sunset spilled gold across the endless fields, painting the wheat with a warm, honey-like glow. The air was thick with the scent of damp soil and freshly cut hay. Wind whispered through the rows, rattling the old boards of Jack Miller's barn like a slow, tired sigh. Jack had lived on this land all his life. The farm wasn't just a home. It was the only constant in a life that had been battered by loss. 2 winters ago, an icy road and a patch of black ice had stolen his wife from him, leaving the house colder than any January wind. Since then, he'd grown used to conversations with the cows, the creak of the windmill, and the silence that crept in when the sun went down. He was just shutting down his tractor for the day when he saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of the cornfield. At first, he thought it was a deer, but deer didn't stumble like that, and they sure as hell didn't have skin the color of twilight. Jack's brow furrowed. He climbed off the tractor and walked toward the figure. The air grew still, like the world was holding its breath. She emerged from the rows like a secret pulled from the night, tall, graceful even in exhaustion, her skin a soft shade of violet that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dying light. Long strands of golden hair clung to her face, tangled from wind and travel. In her arms, a small girl, no older than 6, clung tightly to her neck. The child was a mirror of her mother, violet-skinned and bright-haired, her eyes wide with both fear and hunger. Jack froze mid-step. He'd heard the rumors, sightings out in the plains, strange craft seen over the wheat fields, the government investigations that left nothing but rumors in their wake. But this was no story. They were real. The woman's voice trembled as she spoke, the words in accented but clear English. "Please, food. My daughter. She hasn't eaten in 2 days." Jack's gaze dropped to the little girl. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips dry. A strand of golden hair stuck to the corner of her mouth as she tried to keep her eyes open. The sight hit Jack hard, not because she was alien, but because she looked exactly like the farm kids he'd seen every winter at the food bank, their bellies empty and their eyes carrying that same quiet desperation. "You're a long way from anywhere," Jack said cautiously, his voice low. "How did you?" "I will work. I will trade," she interrupted, her eyes darting away in shame. "One night. I stay. Then we go. Just feed her." Jack felt a twist in his gut. He understood the offer and hated it. The desperation in her voice wasn't for herself. It was all for the child. The wind picked up, pushing a strand of her hair across her face, and Jack could see she was shivering. "You don't have to do that," he said finally. "I'm not that kind of man." Her eyes widened in confusion. Then why help? Jack didn't have an answer ready. He only knew that walking away wasn't an option. "Because no one should have to beg to feed their kid," he said, the words heavier than he expected. "Come on, both of you." He led them toward the farmhouse. The porch light flickered to life, casting long shadows over the cracked wooden steps. Inside, the kitchen was warm with the lingering smell of coffee and the faint sweetness of cornbread from the night before. Jack motioned for her to sit at the table while he opened the fridge. The little girl's eyes lit up at the sight of bread, peanut butter, and a jar of homemade strawberry jam. Jack quickly made her a thick sandwich and poured a glass of milk. She ate with quiet urgency, swinging her legs under the chair, while her mother sat rigid, watching every bite like a hawk. "You got a name?" Jack asked, leaning against the counter. The woman hesitated before answering. "Elira," she said softly. "This is Saran." "Elira," Jack repeated, testing the shape of it in his mouth. "I'm Jack." She nodded once, her eyes still wary. "We cannot stay long. There are people looking for us. Not kind people." Jack noticed the way her shoulders tensed when a truck rumbled by on the road outside. He also noticed the faint bruising along one side of her face, half hidden beneath her hair. "You're safe here tonight," Jack said firmly. "No one comes on my land without me knowing." Elira studied him, as if weighing his words for truth. Something in her posture softened, just barely, and she finally reached for the plate when he slid it toward her. She ate slower than her daughter, but with the same quiet hunger. Outside, the windmill groaned, the wheat swayed, and the horizon bled from gold into deep purple. Jack didn't know who was after them or why. All he knew was that there was no way in hell he was letting them back out into the cold night without a fight. And somewhere deep down, He felt the first flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. The sense that maybe, just maybe, the farm wasn't going to be so empty anymore. The night settled heavy over the Kansas plains, wrapping the farm in a deep, almost unnatural quiet. The crickets chirped out by the fence posts, but even their rhythm seemed subdued. Jack had set up a spare bed for Elira and Saran in the small guest room, a space that hadn't been used since his wife's sister stayed over years ago. The sheets were clean, the quilts thick enough to keep out the November chill. Still, he couldn't shake the tension in the air. Something about the way Elira kept glancing at the windows, how her hands twitched toward the child, even when Saran was just a few feet away, told him she wasn't used to feeling safe. Maybe hadn't in a long time. After making sure they were settled, Jack retreated to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee. He didn't usually drink it this late, but the weight in his gut wasn't going to let him sleep. Half an hour later, he heard it, the faint hum of an engine. Not on a main road, but somewhere closer. Jack set down the mug and moved to the front window. Through the gap in the curtains, he caught sight of two headlights cresting the hill beyond the west pasture. A truck, too slow for a neighbor just passing by. His jaw tightened. The gravel on his driveway crunched, each sound sharp in the stillness. The vehicle stopped at the fence line, the engine idling. He couldn't make out the faces inside, but he knew trouble when he saw it. Behind him, Elira's voice was barely a whisper. "They found us." Jack turned. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, Saran clinging to her leg, the girl's big eyes fixed on the sound outside. "Who are they?" Jack asked. Elira shook her head. "Not government. Not police. Hunters. They take, they sell." Her voice caught, as if the very word tasted foul. Jack's blood ran cold. He'd read the darker rumors, off-world trafficking, the black market for exotics. He'd never given them much thought. Now they were on his property. "You need to hide," he said quickly. "Both of you." "Now." Elira hesitated, glancing toward the back door. "If we run, they'll see you, and you're not making it far with a kid in the dark. Trust me." She stared at him for one tense heartbeat, then nodded. He led them down the narrow hall to the storm cellar hatch in the pantry. It wasn't much, concrete walls stocked with canned goods and a single bare bulb, but it would keep them out of sight. As Elira descended the steps, Saran reached out toward him. Jack gave her the faintest smile and a reassuring nod. "I'll get rid of them. You'll be fine." The hatch closed with a dull thud. When Jack stepped back onto the porch, the cold air bit at his skin. The truck door opened, and two men climbed out. They weren't from around here. No local he knew wore combat boots and tactical jackets like they just stepped out of a war zone. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, rested his hands on his belt in that casual way that "Men, I've got a gun, and I want you to know it." "Evening," the man called. "We're looking for a woman and a kid. Strange-looking pair. You seen anything unusual tonight?" Jack kept his face blank. "Strange how?" The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You'd know if you'd seen them." Jack leaned against the porch railing, his boots planted firm. "Only thing I've seen tonight is my own cattle. And unless your missing lady's got horns and eats hay, you're barking up the wrong tree." The second man, stockier, with a jagged scar down his cheek, stepped closer. "We're trying to keep the area safe. Folks who help her, they get in trouble real fast." Jack's jaw worked. "I've lived here all my life. Trouble tends to come when you go looking for it." There was a long pause. The shaved head one glance toward the barn. "Mind if we look around?" "Yeah," Jack said flatly. "I mind a hell of a lot." Scarface tilted his head, studying him. "You know harboring her is illegal." Jack didn't blink. So is trespassing. The tension stretched thin, sharp enough to snap. Finally, the men exchanged a look. Shaved head spat into the dirt. "If you see her, you'd better call it in. For your own good." They climbed back into the truck, gravel spitting under the tires as they pulled away. But Jack noticed they didn't head for the main road, instead circling the property line, slow and deliberate. When the sound of the engine finally faded, Jack went back inside and unlatched the cellar hatch. Elira was standing at the bottom of the steps, Saran in her arms, both of them tense and silent. "They're gone," he said. "For now." Elira's eyes searched his face. "You didn't tell them." "Wasn't planning on it," Jack said. "But they'll be back. And next time, they might not bother knocking." Her shoulders slumped, just a fraction. "Then we should leave tonight." Jack shook his head. In the dark with a kid? You wouldn't make it past the tree lane. You'll stay here until it's safe, or at least safer than it is right now. For the first time, he saw something in her expression shift. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the faintest thread of belief that he meant what he said. The wind outside picked up, rattling the old barn doors. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Jack knew this wasn't just a stray kindness anymore. Whether he liked it or not, he'd stepped into her fight, and there was no turning back. The next morning came not with the calm of a Kansas sunrise, but with a knot in Jack's gut. He'd barely slept, his mind looping back to the two men in the truck, the way their eyes had scanned his land like they were memorizing it. The air outside was crisp, the wheat fields swaying in the breeze like a golden ocean. Jack stepped out onto the porch with his coffee, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Too quiet, maybe. Inside, he could hear faint movement, the sound of Saran's small feet padding across the kitchen floor. When he stepped back in, he found Elira helping the girl onto one of the chairs. Saran was holding a piece of toast like it was treasure, eating it slowly, savoring every bite. "You didn't sleep," Elira said quietly without looking at him. Jack shrugged. Didn't feel like it. Her gaze flicked toward the window. "They'll come again. They always do." He didn't doubt it. "Then we'll be ready." Elira tilted her head, studying him like she was trying to figure out if he was foolish or brave. "You don't owe us this." Jack met her eyes. "Maybe not, but I'm not the kind of man who lets someone get hunted down on my land." Before she could answer, the distant hum of an engine rolled across the fields. Jack froze. This time it wasn't coming from the road. Elira's grip tightened on Saran's arm. "That's them." Jack grabbed his rifle from the wall. It wasn't fancy, just an old Winchester his father had given him when he turned 16, but it still shot straight. "Down to the cellar," he ordered. She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll stall them." Elira didn't like it, but she didn't argue. She ushered Saran toward the pantry, vanishing into the storm cellar. Jack stepped out onto the porch as a black SUV rolled slowly up the dirt drive, dust curling around its tires. This wasn't the same truck from last night. This one was newer, shinier, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong anywhere near a farm. Three men stepped out. They weren't dressed like the last pair. These were clean tactical vests and mirrored sunglasses. The one in front had the air of someone in charge, tall, with neatly combed dark hair and a voice smooth as oil. "Mr. Miller?" the man called, smiling like they were old friends. "We're here on official business. Mind if we have a word?" Jack stayed on the porch. "Depends on the business." The man stepped closer, his polished boots crunching in the dirt. "We have reason to believe an individual of interest came through this area last night. Dangerous. For your safety and everyone else's, we need to find her." Jack's eyes narrowed. "You mean the violet-skinned woman with the little girl?" The man's smile widened. "Too fast, too eager. So you have seen her." "I hear a lot of things," Jack said evenly. "Doesn't mean I believe all of them." The man's tone sharpened just enough to notice. "This isn't a game, Mr. Miller. You have no idea what you're harboring." Jack's hand rested on the porch railing, close to where the rifle leaned. "What I do know is you're on my property, and I didn't invite you." One of the other men, broader and wearing fingerless gloves, shifted his stance. "We could get a warrant. Be back in an hour." Jack shook his head. "You want to waste an hour driving to town? Be my guest. But by then, you'll be trespassing with a piece of paper instead of without one." For a moment, no one moved. Then the lead man chuckled, like they were sharing some private joke. "You're a stubborn man, Mr. Miller. That's admirable. But stubborn men break, just like anyone else." He turned to leave, but his eyes flicked toward the barn, lingering for a second too long. Then they got into the SUV and drove off, not toward the road, but around the back pasture, out of sight. Jack's pulse hammered in his ears. He went inside and opened the cellar hatch. "They know," Elira said before he could speak. "They won't stop." Jack nodded grimly. "Then we don't wait for them to knock again." She frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we make this place harder to get into than Fort Knox. I've got tools, locks, enough lumber to seal half the windows. And if they do get in, they're not walking out with either of you." For the first time, Elira didn't argue. She helped him drag heavy boards into place, covering the barn doors and reinforcing the back entry. By afternoon, the farm looked less like a home and more like a fortress. But as the sun dipped low, painting the wheat in shades of amber and blood red, Jack caught sight of something moving at the far edge of the property, a glint of metal in the tall grass. A drone, hovering, its small camera eye fixed on the house. "They're watching us," Jack said. Elira's face went pale, or as pale as Violet's skin could go. "If they're using scouts, they're planning to take us tonight." Jack tightened his grip on the rifle. "Then tonight we fight back." Night fell heavy and fast, swallowing the horizon in thick shadow. The air had that still, almost electric quality that came before a storm. Jack had checked every board, every lock, every window. The Winchester was loaded. 2 spare shells sat on the table beside a flashlight. Elira sat at the kitchen table with Saran curled against her, the little girl already asleep. Her golden hair glowed faintly under the dim light, her breathing soft but uneven, like even in dreams she couldn't quite let go of the fear. "You're sure they'll come?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. Elira nodded, her eyes fixed on the dark beyond the window. "Hunters don't leave empty-handed." It happened at 10:47 p.m. A distant engine, then another, then another. The sound of tires on gravel wasn't coming from the main road this time. It was surrounding them. Jack moved fast, dousing the kitchen light. "Downstairs. Now." Elira's voice was sharp but quiet. "And you? I'll buy us time." Her eyes searched his, something unspoken passing between them. Fear, gratitude, maybe something deeper that neither dared name. Then she scooped Saran into her arms and disappeared toward the cellar. The first spotlight beam swept across the barn. Shouts echoed across the fields. Orders barked in clipped tones. Whoever these people were, they weren't just mercenaries. They were organized. Jack crouched low by the front window. He counted 6 men moving through the wheat, their silhouettes black against the pale glow of the moon. One of them carried what looked like a tranquilizer rifle. The sharp crack of splintering would cut through the night. They just forced the barn door. Jack moved fast, slipping out the side door and circling toward the barn. He knew this land, every rut and shadow. They didn't. That was his advantage. The first man through the barn didn't even see him coming. Jack swung the rifle stock hard in the back of his head. The Merc dropped like a sack of grain. But the noise drew the others. A shout. Footsteps pounding. The beam of a flashlight cut through the slats. Jack fired once into the dirt, the blast echoing loud enough to make their ears ring. "Get off my land," he shouted. 2 of them didn't listen. They charged. Jack fired again, this time at the ground just in front of their boots. Dust and dirt sprayed up, forcing them back. For a moment, it worked, but then he saw the glint of metal rising over the far fence. Another drone, this one bigger, heavier, with a faint hum that set his teeth on edge. It hovered, its camera locked on the house. They weren't here to scare him. They were here to flush Elira and Saran out. Jack sprinted back toward the porch. As he did, a sharp crack rang out. The sound of a gunshot, not his own. A bullet smacked into the porch post, splintering wood inches from his head. He dove inside, slamming the door. Elira. The cellar hatch burst open. She was already halfway up the steps, eyes blazing. "They're coming from the back too." Jack grabbed the flashlight and tossed her the spare shells. "If they get in here, you shoot first and ask questions never." Before she could reply, the kitchen window exploded inward, shards of glass raining across the counter. A man in black tactical gear tried to climb through and froze mid-motion. Not because of Jack, because Elira moved. It was the first time Jack saw what she could really do. In a blur, she crossed the room, her hand closing around the man's throat. A faint violet light shimmered along her skin, pulsing from her palm into him. He gasped once, then went limp, sliding back out the window like a rag doll. She looked at Jack, breathing hard. "We can't stay. Not after this." He knew she was right. The farm was home, but it wasn't a fortress, not against people like this. And if they caught her, "Truck's out back," he said. "We make a run for it." They moved fast. Jack grabbed a duffel and tossed in food, water, and ammo. Elira pulled a blanket tight around Saran's small frame. The girl was awake now, eyes wide, silent but clinging to her mother's neck. Outside, shouts grew closer. The crunch of boots on gravel was almost at the porch. Jack shouldered the duffel, handed Elira the flashlight, and led them out the back door. The old Ford pickup sat in the shadows beside the shed. He threw the duffel into the bed and climbed in. The engine roared to life, but headlights flared behind them instantly. Another SUV, blocking the rear drive. Jack cursed, throwing the truck into reverse. Hold on. He spun the wheel, fishtailing through the yard, past the rusted water tower, and out into the north field. Wheat slapped against the truck sides, dust billowing behind them. Bullets sparked off the bumper. Saran whimpered, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Jack kept his eyes on the faint break in the fence ahead, the old service road that led into the woods. If they could make it there, the dense trees would cover their escape. The pickup jolted as they hit the gap. Gravel sprayed. The engine groaned, but it held. In the rearview mirror, the headlights vanished as the pursuers hit the field's rougher patches. They didn't stop until the farm was long out of sight, the only sound the wind through the trees and the steady, shallow breaths of the child. Jack finally killed the engine. The silence that followed was thick. He looked over at Elira. In the faint moonlight, her eyes met his. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. Jack exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I did." For a moment, they just sat there, two fugitives in the cab of an old truck, their lives now tangled in ways neither had expected. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, one the world said could never happen, stay with me. The night's only just begun, and what's coming next will test every promise they've made to survive. The woods were colder than Jack remembered, the kind of cold that crept under your collar and stayed there. They'd parked the truck deep enough in the trees that no headlights could be seen from the road. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled, each sound loud in the silence. Elira sat in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped tightly around Saran. The little girl had fallen asleep again, exhaustion finally winning over fear. Her golden hair lay in tangled waves across her mother's arm, her small breaths clouding in the frigid air. Jack leaned back in the driver's seat, listening to the faint rustle of branches above. His body was tense, every muscle locked in a state between fight and flight. "They'll be looking for us," he said quietly. Elira didn't look at him. "They're always looking for us." Something in her tone made Jack glance at her more closely. There was no panic in her voice, only a tired certainty, like she'd been running for so long that the chase itself had become her normal. "How long?" Jack asked. She shifted slightly. "Since the day I arrived. 3 years." Jack frowned. "You've been here that long." "I didn't mean to come here," she said. Her voice was low, as if she were afraid the trees themselves might overhear. "My transport was attacked. I fell through your atmosphere. I was alone then. I met—" Her voice faltered, and she glanced at Saran. "I met someone who was kind. For a time. But kindness doesn't last. Not with people like me." Jack caught the flicker of pain that crossed her face. He wanted to ask more, but he'd learned in his years on the farm that sometimes silence did more work than questions. Instead, he reached for the thermos in the duffel and poured her a little coffee. She accepted it with both hands, the steam curling in the cold night. After a moment, Elira's gaze shifted to him. "Why are you doing this, Jack? You don't even know me." Jack looked out the windshield, where the moonlight cut pale silver through the trees. "I know enough. I know you're running from something ugly. I know you've got a kid who depends on you. And I know that if I turned you over, I'd never sleep again." Her lips pressed together like she wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. A sudden snap of a branch in the distance made them both tense. Jack set the coffee down and reached for the rifle on the floorboard. He moved to the edge of the truck, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. Footsteps. Slow. Jack raised the rifle, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. "Who's there?" A beam of light flickered between the trees, dancing over the leaves. Then a voice. Male, older, steady. "Easy there, Miller. It's just me." Jack's breath eased a fraction. "Harlan." From the shadows stepped Harlan Peters, Jack's nearest neighbor, though near, meant over 2 miles of wheat fields between them. He was a wiry man in his 60s, with a thick gray beard and the kind of eyes that missed nothing. "You've got company, I see," Harlan said, glancing toward the truck. Jack didn't lower the rifle entirely. "Just passing through." Harlan smirked faintly. "You forget I used to hunt for a living. I can smell trouble before I see it. Those boys in the black SUV came by my place an hour ago, asking questions. I told them I hadn't seen you. Figured you might need a heads up." Elira stiffened in the passenger seat, her grip tightening on Saran. "They're not just asking questions," Jack said. They came to take her. Harlan studied Elira for a long moment, and though his expression didn't change much, something softened in his eyes. Figured as much. Folks don't post that kind of gear for charity work. He took a step closer. You've got maybe till dawn before they grid the whole area. If you're staying in the county, you need somewhere they won't think to look. Jack hesitated. And you've got somewhere in mind? Harlan's smirk widened just a hair. Old grain silo out by the river. Haven't been used since '98. Solid concrete. One way in, one way out. Hard to find unless you know where to look. Jack glanced at Elira. She didn't speak, but her eyes met his, steady and unblinking. She was leaving the choice to him. All right, Jack said finally. Lead the way. Harlan nodded, then turned back into the dark, his flashlight beam bobbing ahead of them. Jack started the truck again, following the faint outline of Harlan's ATV through the trees. The drive was slow, the path barely wide enough for the pickup, branches scraping the sides like skeletal fingers. Finally, the trees opened into a clearing, and there it was, the silo, tall and weathered, its curved walls silvered by moonlight. Inside, the air was cool and dry. The smell of old grain still lingered faintly. Jack helped Elira set up a corner with blankets from the duffel. Saran stirred, but didn't wake as her mother laid her down. Harlan stood by the doorway, arms crossed. I'll keep watch from the ridge. If they get close, you'll hear my shot first. Why are you helping? Jack asked. Harlan shrugged. Because my daddy raised me to know the difference between hunters and predators. And those men out there, they're the latter. Without another word, he disappeared into the night. Jack sank down beside the blanket pile, his back against the cold concrete wall. Across from him, Elira sat with her knees drawn up, watching him in the dim light. You could still walk away, she said softly. Jack shook his head. Not going to happen. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of things neither dared say aloud. Gratitude, weariness, and maybe the smallest spark of trust. Outside, the wind carried the faint, distant rumble of engines. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. The night in the silo was long. The thick concrete walls trapped the cold, and every sound, the settling of dust, the creak of old metal, seemed sharper in the stillness. Jack had pulled his jacket over himself, but he'd given the heavier quilt to Elira and Saran. He couldn't sleep, not with the memory of headlights cutting across his fields, of men moving through the wheat like shadows. Instead, he kept watch, his back to the wall, eyes adjusting to the dim glow of the small lantern they'd set between them. Saran stirred once, curling closer into her mother's side. Elira's hand moved automatically, stroking the child's hair. She looked tired, but there was a strange calm to her face now, the kind that comes when you've already survived worse than the night ahead. You've done this before, Jack said quietly. Elira's eyes flicked to his. Run? Hide? Yes. Too many times. Jack nodded slowly. But never with me. For a moment, she almost smiled. No, never with someone who stays. Silence settled again, but it wasn't the cold, distant kind. It was softer. The kind that let two people breathe in the same space without feeling like strangers. By dawn, the frost had crept along the inside of the silo walls, turning them silver. Jack stepped outside for the first time, scanning the ridge where Harlan had promised to keep watch. A faint puff of smoke rose from behind a cluster of pines, his signal that the perimeter was clear for now. Inside, Saran was awake, sitting cross-legged on the blanket with a crust of bread in her hands. She looked up at Jack with cautious curiosity, like a wild animal deciding if the human in front of it could be trusted. Jack crouched down to her level. You like peanut butter? Her eyes lit up just a little. What's peanut butter? Jack grinned. Guess we'll have to fix that. He rummaged through the duffel, pulling out the jar and a loaf of bread. In minutes, Saran had her first peanut butter sandwich, and by the look on her face, it was a revelation. She took another bite, slower this time, savoring it. Elira watched the exchange with quiet interest. She hasn't laughed in weeks, she said softly. She will, Jack replied. Kids are better at bouncing back than we give them credit for. Elira tilted her head. And what about you? Do you bounce back? The question caught him off guard. He looked down at the knife in his hands, spreading peanut butter on his own slice. I don't know. Haven't really tried since my wife. He trailed off, but Elira didn't push. Instead, she shifted, pulling the quilt tighter around her shoulders. Loss is the one thing that feels the same no matter where you're from. There was something in her tone, an echo of her own grief, that made Jack meet her gaze again. Her golden hair was loose now, falling in messy strands over her face. The early light caught the edges of her violet skin, turning it into something almost luminous. He realized then that she wasn't just surviving. She was enduring, holding herself together for the sake of the small girl sitting between them. And somehow, that made him want to help her even more. By mid-morning, Harlan came down from the ridge. "You've got a window," he said. "Road's quiet, but it won't stay that way." Jack nodded. "We can't keep running forever." Elira stood. "We don't have forever. They'll track us until they have what they want." Jack's brow furrowed. "And what is that exactly? Why you? Why Saran?" Elira hesitated. "Because we're rare. Not just our kind. Us, specifically. Saran's different. She can do things even I can't. They want her for that." Jack glanced at the little girl, who was now humming softly to herself, stacking crumbs into neat little piles. He felt his stomach twist. They're not getting her. Period. Harlan looked between them. "If you mean that, you're going to have to stop thinking like a farmer and start thinking like someone they're hunting." The three of them spent the rest of the day fortifying the silo's entrance with whatever they could find in Harlan's old storage shed. Steel bars, rusted chains, even a slab of metal Jack suspected had once been part of a tractor roof. It wasn't perfect, but it would slow anyone down. When the work was done, Jack found himself outside with Elira, standing at the edge of the tree line. The air smelled of pine and cold earth. "You could still go on without me," she said suddenly. Jack shook his head. "You're not listening. I'm in this now. I'm not letting you handle it alone." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes sharp, searching for the catch. "And if it gets you killed, then at least I'll know I did the right thing." Something in her expression shifted, the tension in her shoulders easing. She turned her gaze back to the trees. "On my world, that would make you a fool." Jack smirked faintly. "Guess it makes me a fool here, too." For the first time since he'd met her, Elira laughed. Just a short, quiet sound, but it was real. It startled him enough that he found himself grinning back. That night, after Saran fell asleep, the two of them sat by the lantern again. Jack told her about growing up on the farm, about the storms that could flatten a field in minutes, about the time he and his brother tried to ride a steer and ended up in the ER. In return, Elira told him about the purple oceans of her home, where the waves glowed at night, and the massive creatures that sang beneath the surface. Her voice softened when she spoke of it, and for a moment, Jack could almost see the world through her eyes. The danger was still out there, circling closer. But inside those concrete walls, for a few stolen hours, there was warmth, and maybe, just maybe, the start of something worth fighting for. The first sign that something was wrong came just after midnight. It was subtle, the faint, metallic buzz of an engine carried on the wind. Jack's eyes shot open. He'd been sleeping light, his hand already on the shotgun before his brain caught up. Elira was already awake, crouched beside Saran, who still slept under the quilt. "They found us," she whispered, her voice tight. Harlan's voice crackled through the old CB radio in the corner. "2 trucks. Headlights off. Coming from the north. You've got 5 minutes." Jack's pulse kicked into high gear. 5 minutes wasn't enough to run, and hiding wasn't an option anymore. They'd spent days fortifying the silo. Now they'd find out if it was worth anything. "Stay with her," Jack told Elira, shoving the shotgun into her hands. "If they breach the door, you use it." Her eyes flashed. "I can fight. I know you can. But you fight best by keeping her safe." He didn't wait for her answer. He was already moving toward the entrance. The first impact rattled the steel bars like a thunderclap. Dust rained from the ceiling as the truck's engines roared outside. Shadows moved beyond the thin gaps in the makeshift barricade. Then came another hit, harder this time, bending one of the chains. "Jack!" Harlan's voice was in his ear now, urgent. "They're wearing reinforced vests. Your rounds won't do much." Jack swore under his breath, grabbed the crowbar, and wedged it against the door's main support. "Then we keep them out as long as we can." Another crash, this one accompanied by a splintering sound. Jack's hands burned as the crowbar vibrated under the force. He could hear muffled voices now, Orders barked in sharp, clipped tones. Whoever these men were, they weren't amateurs. Then a sound cut through the chaos. Saran screaming. Jack's head snapped toward the back of the silo. A section of wall they'd overlooked. An old grain chute sealed decades ago, now rattled violently as hands reached through. One of the men had found a weak point. Jack sprinted toward them, swinging the crowbar like a bat. The first blow crushed the fingers reaching in. A howl of pain came from outside, but it was drowned out by the next impact against the door. Elira was there now, her body between Saran and the breach. Her violet skin gleamed under the lantern light, her golden hair wild around her face. In her hands, the shotgun looked almost too human for her, but she held it steady. The door gave way with a screech of tearing metal. Two figures in black tactical gear poured in, rifles raised. The first took a step toward Elira and froze. Jack had thrown himself between them, ramming the crowbar into the man's midsection. The impact staggered him just enough for Elira to fire. The blast lit the silo in a single, blinding flash. The man went down. The second didn't hesitate. He swung his rifle toward Saran. Elira moved faster than Jack thought possible. She crossed the space in a blur, her shoulders slamming into him just as the rifle went off. The round tore through her side, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Jack's roar filled the silo. He grabbed the second man and slammed him into the wall hard enough to rattle the bolts. The fight was short and brutal, a flurry of fists, knees, and the heavy steel crowbar until the man crumpled to the floor. For a moment, the only sound was Jack's ragged breathing. Then he saw Elira. She was on her knees, one hand pressed to her side, blood seeping between her fingers, darker than human blood, almost black in the dim light. Saran clung to her, sobbing. Jack dropped beside her. "Stay with me, Elira. You hear me? You stay with me." Her eyes met his, pain flickering there, but also something else, defiance. "You kept her safe," she whispered. Harlan burst through the side entrance a moment later, rifle in hand. He took in the scene with a grim nod. "We gotta move. More will be coming." Jack shook his head. "She's bleeding out." Elira's grip tightened weakly on his arm. "Don't stop. Not for me." Jack ignored her. "Harlan, get the truck. We're going now." Within minutes, they were moving. Elira laid across the back seat, Saran holding her mother's hand, Jack driving faster than he'd ever driven in his life. Every mile felt like a stolen piece of time. In the rearview mirror, Jack caught Elira watching him. Even in pain, there was something steady in her gaze, trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. But he knew this wasn't over. Tonight was just proof of how far their enemies would go, and how far he was willing to go to stop them. The truck's headlights carved a pale tunnel through the darkness as Jack tore down the old farm road. Every bump in the dirt track made Elira's body shift, and each time, she stifled a sound that made Jack's grip on the wheel tighten. Harlan sat in the passenger seat, scanning the night with his rifle. "We're not heading to town, are we?" Jack shook his head. "Hospital's too public. We go there. We're handing her to them on a silver plate. How about a place?" "A place." Harlan's voice was skeptical, but he didn't press. 10 minutes later, Jack pulled into a narrow path hidden by overgrown brush. The truck's tires crunched over gravel until a small cabin came into view, his father's old hunting lodge, abandoned for years. Jack and Harlan carried Elira inside. The lodge smelled of dust and pine, the air cold enough to bite, but it was shelter. Jack laid her down on the worn leather couch. Saran hovered close, her small hands trembling as they hovered over her mother's face. "Is she?" "She's alive," Jack said quickly. He knelt beside the couch and carefully moved Elira's arm to see the wound. The fabric around it was soaked through with her strange, dark blood. "I need a med kit." "Harlan." "Already on it." Harlan disappeared into the back room, his boots thudding on the floorboards. Elira's eyes opened slightly. "This isn't safe for you." Jack met her gaze, his voice steady. "Safe stopped matching the night I let you stay." Her lips curved into the faintest ghost of smile before she winced. When Harlan returned with the kit, Jack worked quickly. The wound was deep, but the bullet had passed through. He cleaned it, wincing when her breath hissed between her teeth, and wrapped it tight. "You'll need rest. And food." Her gaze softened, almost apologetic. I'm not used to being cared for. You better get used to it, Jack muttered, standing. Because I'm not letting you or your kid go back out there alone. Saran clung to his arm, her eyes big and unblinking. You mean we can stay? Jack crouched to meet her height. For as long as it takes. The girl's shoulders loosened, the first real sign she believed him. The hours stretched into early morning. Harlan took the first watch outside, pacing the porch with his rifle. Jack sat by the fire, occasionally glancing toward the couch where Elira slept. The flickering light made her look almost human, except for the violet hue of her skin and the metallic sheen in her hair. He caught himself wondering, not for the first time, what her life had been before all this. Before hunger had driven her to make that desperate bargain. Before people like those men tonight had decided she was something to be hunted. When she stirred, her eyes were clearer. You fought like someone with something to lose, she murmured. Jack shrugged. Yes, I do. A long silence hung between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then she said, In my world, debt is sacred. What you've done, I can never repay. Then don't try, Jack said simply. Just live. That's enough. By dawn, the world outside seemed deceptively peaceful. Frost clung to the grass, and the sound of a lone crow echoed through the still air. But Jack knew the men who had come for them wouldn't stop. Harlan came in, rubbing his hands for warmth. I checked the road. No tracks but ours. We bought some time. Jack poured coffee into 3 mismatched mugs, sliding one toward Harlan and another toward Elira. She eyed it curiously before sipping, her expression shifting as the bitter taste hit. Not what you're used to, Jack asked. She shook her head. It's stronger, but I like it. Saran wandered in, yawning, her hair a golden tangle. Jack made her toast from the last loaf he had, spreading honey on it. She smiled like it was a feast. After breakfast, they sat around the small wooden table. Jack unfolded a map of the county. We can't stay here forever. We need a plan. They'll regroup. Elira studied the map, her finger tracing the river's course. There's a crossing here, she said softly. If we can make it, I can reach others like me. People who will help. That's a long way, Harlan said. And dangerous. Jack met Elira's gaze. Then we do it smart. One step at a time. Something shifted in her expression, then a flicker of trust, or maybe hope. She nodded once. That night, Jack checked the perimeter one last time before settling into his chair by the fire. Elira was already asleep, Saran curled beside her. He realized, as he watched them breathe in unison, that the farmhouse, the routine, even the grief he'd carried, all of it felt different now. Because now, he had something worth protecting again, and he wasn't going to lose it. The second night at the lodge was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made every creak in the floorboard sound like a warning. Jack sat on the porch, boots planted on the cold wood. The stars spread out above him like scattered embers. The air smelled of pine and distant smoke from the fireplace inside. He was exhausted, but his mind wouldn't settle. Behind him, Elira stirred. She moved slowly, still favoring her injured side, but she came out anyway, wrapped in one of the lodge's old wool blankets. You should be resting, Jack said without turning. I've rested enough, she replied, her voice low, carrying that strange, melodic quality that seemed sharper in the stillness. She eased herself onto the step beside him. For a while, they didn't speak. The sound of the wind in the trees was enough. Then she said, In my world, survival is the only currency. No one gives without expecting more in return. What you've done for us, it's not something I've known before. Jack exhaled slowly. I didn't do it for payback. Her gaze lingered on him, studying his profile. Then why? He thought about it, really thought about it. Because the first time I saw you, you looked like someone who'd been running too long. And I know what that feels like. I know what it's like to think you're alone. Her eyes softened, though her expression was unreadable. And now I'm not, Jack said simply. Inside, Saran slept soundly in front of the fireplace, her small frame curled under a blanket, a faint smile on her lips. Jack glanced at her through the open door. She's tougher than she looks. She has to be, Elira said. She's all I have left of before. Jack didn't push. Whatever before was, it still cast a shadow over her. But there was no mistaking the way she looked at her daughter, as if every breath the girl took was a reason to keep going. "You know they'll come again," Jack said. "Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not for weeks. But they won't stop." "I know. You sure you still want to try for that crossing?" She hesitated, then nodded. "It's the only way we'll ever stop running." Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then we'll get you there. Both of you." The conversation drifted into silence again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. This one was heavier, but warmer somehow, like they both knew something had shifted between them, even if neither would say it out loud. After a while, Elira asked, "Do you ever wonder why some people risk themselves for strangers?" Jack thought of the first time he'd seen her at the edge of his property, hungry, desperate, trying to hold herself with dignity even as the world pushed her down. "Yeah, but I think it's because deep down, we know we're not supposed to get through life alone." Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "That sounds human. Maybe it is, but I think it's more than that." He glanced at her. "Maybe it's universal." Later, when Elira went back inside, Jack stayed out on the porch for a while longer. He let his eyes trace the tree lean, watching for movement, listening for anything out of place. It struck him then how much his world had changed in just a handful of days. Before, it had been just him, the empty fields, and the quiet that was more dead than peaceful. Now, every sound mattered. Every decision mattered. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't living just for himself. Before going in, he checked the locks on the doors, then stood for a moment watching them. Elira asleep on the couch, Saran curled against her. The firelight made their skin shimmer in ways human skin never could, but it didn't matter. In that moment, they were just his responsibility, and maybe something more. He didn't know what would come next. The crossing, the chase, the danger. But he knew this. He wasn't going to let them go. Not to the men hunting them. Not to anyone. That night, as the fire burned low and the wind rattled the old windows, Jack finally let his eyes close. His last thought before sleep was simple, steady, and unshakable. He would see this through, no matter the cost. 6 months later, the snow had melted from the fields, leaving behind dark, rich soil ready for planting. The old farmhouse, Jack's farmhouse, stood solid against the spring breeze, its windows open for the first time in years. The barn doors were painted fresh red. The fence posts had been replaced. The land looked alive again, and so did Jack. He was on the porch, fixing the hinge on the screen door, when Saran ran past him, her golden hair catching the sunlight. She was laughing, clutching a battered soccer ball, chasing the half-wild farm dog they'd taken in during the winter. "Don't go near the creek," Jack called after her. "I know," she shouted back, without even slowing. From the barn came the sound of Elira's voice, still carrying that otherworldly tone, but softer now, more at home. She stepped into view, wiping her hands on a rag. Her wound had healed months ago, though the faint scar remained. She wore a faded plaid shirt over her alien gray tunic, blending more into this world than Jack would have believed possible the first night he met her. "You're spoiling her," Elira said, tilting her head toward the girl. "She's a kid. She's supposed to be spoiled a little," Jack replied. "Besides, she's pulling her weight." She helped with the fence. She also tried to teach her dog to guard the stars, Elira said with a small smile. Jack smirked. "Sounds like he'll be good at it." The river crossing had been dangerous. Jack didn't like thinking about it. The nights they'd slept in hiding, the close calls, the sound of engines in the distance that made them freeze and listen for footsteps. But they'd made it. And instead of leaving him behind, Elira had made a choice. She'd stayed. It hadn't been easy. They still kept a low profile. Elira never went into town unless absolutely necessary. And even then, she wore a hood or a wide-brimmed hat. The world wasn't ready for her, for them. But the farm was big enough, quiet enough, to be theirs. That afternoon, Jack, Elira, and Saran sat on the porch with glasses of sweet tea. The sun was setting, turning the sky orange and gold. Saran rested her head on Elira's shoulder, fighting sleep. The farm dog lay at Jack's feet, his ears twitching at every sound. For a while, they just watched the horizon. "This is what I thought home would feel like," Elira said finally. Jack looked at her. "And does it?" She met his gaze, her strange violet eyes steady. "Yes, because it's not a place, Jack. It's the people." The words hung in the air, heavier than they seemed. As darkness fell, Jack lit the lantern on the porch. Fireflies began to blink in the fields, and somewhere in the trees, a whip-poor-will called. He realized he wasn't listening for trouble anymore. Not like before. He was listening to life happening around him. They still had to be careful. They still had shadows in their past. But they had a future now. And that was something worth holding on to. Jack stood, stretching, and glanced at the camera he'd set up earlier, part of the small online channel he'd started since the winter. A place where he told stories, some true, some not, about life, survival, and the strange twists fate could take. He looked straight into the lens, his voice calm but carrying weight. If you've ever rooted for a love that wasn't supposed to happen, stick around. Because some stories aren't just about surviving. They're about finding something worth living for. He reached over, clicked the camera off, and went back to the porch, back to them. Because that was where he belonged. If you've ever rooted for a love that wasn't supposed to happen, hit that subscribe button and stick around. Because some stories aren't just about surviving, they're about finding something worth living for.